this house. The house loves a party, and she really likes a Gatsby-themed party. And just the very basics about the house, it is a Chicago landmark. It was built in 1909, and the architect was George Mayer, who was a contemporary and co-worker of Frank Lloyd Wright. And this is a Chicago landmark for that reason. The interior was largely redone in the 20s. So the first floor, the second floor, both are representing the 20s, and so it's perfect for this party.
When I came back from the East last autumn, I felt that I wanted the world to be a uniform and at a sort of moral attention forever. I wanted no more riotous excursions with privileged glimpses into the human heart. Only Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this book, was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have an unaffected scorn. If personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, then there was something gorgeous about him. Some heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, as if he were related to one of those intricate machines that register earthquakes 10,000 miles away. This responsiveness had nothing to do with that flabby impressionability which is dignified under the name of creative temperament. It was an extraordinary gift for hope, a romantic readiness such as I have never found in any other person, and which is not likely I shall ever find again. No, Gatsby turned out all right in the end. It was what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams, that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men.
They were drinking lime cordial to offset scurvy, but it tasted so bad that they started adding Navy strength gin, which is 118 proof. So that is how the gimlet came about. Now there's two theories on how and why the gimlet is named the gimlet. It was the boring tool, you know, the tool that used to punch holes in things, and then there was a general in the Navy whose last name was Gimlet.
So, Chicago and Chicagoans, I argue in my book, are perhaps the largest influence on Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald met the Chicagoan 16-year-old Ginevra King on January 4th, 1915, at a sledding party. And you may note that that was just a few months after the drink you're drinking right now was invented. He was home in St. Paul for winter break from Princeton, and she was visiting her friend and roommate, Marie Hersey. She noted the meeting in her diary, and the next day wrote, "I'm absolutely gone on Scott." When Fitzgerald met Ginevra King, he was not meeting just another rich, soon-to-be debutante, nor was he meeting just a wealthy, middle Western girl, which is how she is described in scholarship about Fitzgerald. He was meeting the heir to one of the largest and most elite American fortunes, and meeting the granddaughter and daughter of the men who made Chicago and ran Chicago, the industrial center of America. After the first meeting, Scott and Ginevra began a furious letter-writing exchange, which was a popular pastime. Though they wrote each other frequently, they only saw each other 3 times during this period. Scott visited her at Westover on February 20th, 1915, where they were heavily chaperoned and watched behind glass, according to Ginevra. That spring, Scott invited her to go to the sophomore prom at Princeton, but her mother refused to let this 16-year-old girl go halfway across the country unchaperoned to the university dance. Ginevra's letters bemoan the unfairness of the situation and the total unreasonableness of her mother. Scott and Ginevra managed to meet at the Ritz in New York in June. Later that June, on the way to Montana, he visited her at her family's new estate in Lake Forest, where he met her parents, friends, and others in the King social circle. Fitzgerald's final letter to Ginevra was his dry acknowledgement of her wedding to Billy Mitchell, sent on July 21st, 1918. Ginevra and Scott did meet one last time in 1938. They had lunch and then went to a bar. Scholarship and popular culture has only presented two possibilities for understanding Ginevra within the context of Fitzgerald's life. Either ignore her completely, because doing otherwise disrupts the legend of Zelda, or place her on the pedestal next to Zelda as either Fitzgerald's first muse or as an additional muse, a kind of muse sister wife to Zelda. Instead, Ginevra needs to be understood within the context of Chicago and seen as one of the many Chicagoans who helped define Fitzgerald's relationship to the city. So to that end, and thinking about other influences now, I think that Eleanor Sissy Medill Patterson, whose grandfather, Joseph Medill, was the editor-in-chief and chief owner of the Chicago Tribune, is also one of the models for Fitzgerald's beautiful, outrageous women from Chicago and Lake Forest. Sissy Patterson's father's family settled Lake Forest, and Ginevra King would have known them well. They founded Lake Forest College, and Lake Forest Academy. After her father's death in 1899, Sissy's mother bought land in Washington on DuPont Circle, where Marshall Fields and Bertha and Potter Palmer, who you may have heard of, all of whom her mother knew well, wintered for the social season. Her uncle, Robert McCormick, had become ambassador to Russia after completing a post in Vienna, where Sissy visited in March of 1904. And this is where it gets good. Count Gasiski of Russia had become increasingly interested in Sissy, and he had a reputation as a bad egg. He took Sissy to Paris and showed the city to her, all the while making her family even more nervous that he was a gold digger. They were married in Washington in 1904, despite her family's objections. A daughter was born on September 3rd, 1905, and Sissy went with the Count to his home, a huge feudal manor in Russian Poland. Their family life did not go well. They separated and then rejoined several times, but eventually Sissy left. She kidnapped their child, hiding her in a house near London, but the Count pursued her and took the child, hiding her in an Austrian convent. In 1911, Sissy sued the Count in Chicago Circuit Court for a divorce. While waiting for the divorce to go through, she went home to live in Lake Forest. This summer, Fitzgerald visited Ginevra and Sissy's cousin, his Princeton friend Gordon McCormick, remember him, in Lake Forest. Sissy was away in Newport for a few months, and the scandal and divorce were all anyone was talking about. Patterson's reputation, bad marriage to, and child with a man, considered to be a violent brute, can easily be seen as providing some of the basis for Daisy's marriage to Tom Buchanan in The Great Gatsby. Sissy had numerous suitors while waiting for her divorce in Lake Forest, including Freddie McLaughlin, who had pursued her when she was a debutante. McLaughlin, the heir to a coffee fortune, had recently divorced, and like Sissy, was a strong equestrian and fox hunter. He was also the best polo player at Awensia, and had an international reputation for being a six-goal polo player. He had never recovered from the romance with Sissy and felt the two were perfectly matched from the beginning and couldn't stand that she had so many other suitors. One night, Sissy and Count Johann Heinrich von Bernstoff, she clearly had a type, were driving home from the night's activities along a deserted back road in Lake Forest. McLaughlin jumped from his car and attacked von Bernstoff with his riding crop and chased his rival away from Sissy. No one witnessed the attack except those involved, and rumors were still swirling about it when Fitzgerald visited Gordon and Ginevra in Lake Forest. This story also provides many of the raw elements of The Great Gatsby. the love-struck suitor from Sissy's debutante days, the polo player from Lake Forest, the brute with a whip, the beautiful and wild debutante, the dangerous confrontation of two entitled suitors. Fitzgerald recombined some of the story, giving the suitor Gatsby the gentle upper hand, and the debutante's husband the brutish characteristics of the polo player from Lake Forest with a terrible horsewhip. In September of 1924, Fitz had just completed the manuscript draft of Gatsby. The Fitzgeralds arrived in Paris early 1925, and he met Sissy for the first time. In 1928, Patterson published the thinly veiled novel Fall Flight, based completely on her own life. In it, she names her alter ego Daisy, suggesting that she too made the connection between herself and Fitzgerald's character.
The history behind this cocktail is there was a apothecary, like I was saying earlier, Antoine Peychaud. He produced this cocktailing bitters. I know you guys have all seen this. If you've ever been to even a Jewel, a Target, they sell it everywhere. He was producing cocktailing bitters in the 1850s. Fast forward to the 1870s, and there was a family who had a brand of cognac called Sazerac de Forge, and they were sending their product to what was known then as the Coffee House, which then turned into the Sazerac House. So there was a bartender there that started putting the Peychaud bitters in Sazerac de Forge, which is cognac, because Sazerac de Forge was Antoine Peychaud's favorite cognac. Add a touch of absinthe, a touch of sugar, a little lemon oil over the top, you got yourself a cocktail. Well, there was a, long story long, there was a issue with the wine crops in Europe, which depleted the stock of cognac. Cognac is distilled from grapes, but what do we have? We have a bunch of rye whiskey and a bunch of bourbon. So eventually it transitioned into that. But if you're in New Orleans and you ask for a Sazerac, they're going to make it with cognac, unless you tell them not to. But that is the first cocktail. This cocktail was developed in the 1870s. It is still a classic today.
So we're going to bring you to the end of Gatsby here, and I am going to read to you 3 paragraphs of some of the best prose you've ever heard in your entire life, and I hope I will do it justice. I am Nick Carraway. Most of the big shore places were closed now, and there were hardly any lights except the shadowy moving glow of a ferry boat across the Sound. And as the moon rose higher, the inessential houses began to melt away, until gradually I became aware of the old island here that flowered once for Dutch sailors' eyes, a fresh green breast of the new world. Its vanished trees, the trees that had made the way for Gatsby's house, had once pandered in whispers to the last and greatest of all human dreams. For a transitory, enchanted moment, man must have held his breath in the presence of this continent. Compelled into an aesthetic contemplation he neither understood nor desired. Face to face for the last time in history with something commensurate to his capacity for wonder. And as I sat there brooding on the old unknown world, I thought of Gatsby's wonder when he first picked out the green light at the end of Daisy's dock. He had come a long way to this blue lawn, and his dream must have seemed so close that he could hardly fail to grasp it. He did not know that it was already behind him. Somewhere back in that vast obscurity beyond the city, where the dark fields of the Republic rolled on under the night. Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgiastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and one fine morning. And so we beat on. I'm going to cry. Boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. Sorry, I couldn't.